Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, I have a special guest here to start the briefing today. In just a couple minutes, the special presidential envoy to the coalition to counter ISIL, Brett McGurk, someone you all know very, very well, is going to come up here and take the podium. He's going to give you an update on the counter ISIL campaign for a few minutes, and then he'll be able to stick around as well to take a few questions, just a few. I'll be moderating those questions, so please look to me, and I'll be calling on you. We won't have time to take too many, but we'll take a few, and then I'll get back up here and we'll do the rest of the daily briefing after Mr. McGurk leaves. With that, Brett.
So, thanks for seeing me today. I thought what I would do, I was here a couple months ago or so, or 6 weeks ago, and gave an overview of kind of what we're trying to do, about 8 or 9 different points of pressure and how what we call lines of effort kind of come together and what we do throughout the government to try to put pressure on ISIL. And what I thought I'd do is just give an update on where we are, kind of as we look around the periphery of this phony self-proclaimed caliphate, and then finish a little bit with Ramadi and kind of the significant events that happened over the holiday. This, of course, as I briefed in detail last time, this is ISIL core, Iraq, Syria. That does not lessen the importance of the networks. We think of ISIL in terms of the core, the networks, and then the affiliates. There are 8 affiliates, and we're constantly trying to pressure all of these things at once. But you really have to focus on the core. I think, as the President said, focused on the heart, which we're doing. So I would just start. I'll go around the horn kind of clockwise. It's in no particular order, but I think that's the easiest way to do it. The number 1 on the map, and first what this map indicates, and this is only in November, so it would have been changed since then. But the green on the map represents territory that ISIL has lost over the last year to 18 months or so. In Iraq, it's about 40% of its territory. So you can see the kind of shrinkage, and that's going to, we think, increase over the coming months. It's already increased actually quite significantly just since this map was put out in November. The dark red represents areas that they have gained over the last 18 months, and so there are some areas of concern that we look at on the map, which we're focused on with our partners and in the coalition effort. But let me start at the number 1. This is the 98-kilometer strip of border with Turkey that we talk about quite a bit. If you see to the east of the Euphrates, all that green, we've taken away that entire border from ISIL. They control the entire thing about a little over a year ago. If I was here around the time of Kobani, there's just a little teeny dot of green, about 5 square blocks in the town of Kobani. Since then, obviously, a dramatically changed situation, and it's going to continue to change dramatically against ISIL's interests over the coming months. On one, that 98-kilometer strip of border, it's not only what we're doing across the border in Syria, but most significantly in this building, the diplomacy with Turkey and focused on the Turks and really closing up that 98-kilometer border. And since we were at the G20 with President Obama, had a very good meeting with President Erdogan about this very issue, we have seen the Turks take some significant steps in terms of setting up defensive perimeters, more patrols, much harder for ISIL to get resources into this very critical area. We're continuing that engagement now. I think the chairman, General Dunford, is in Turkey this week. The Vice President will be heading out to Turkey later this month, and we have teams of experts, particularly from DHS, who are heading out to Turkey to talk about this very critical stretch of border. Because you take ISIL away from that border, it is a truly self-contained entity and a very different problem. So that's a true kind of interagency effort. There's a military side, what we're doing, that little splotch of dark red, we call that the Mari line. I talked about that last time. We think we've checked the western advance of ISIL and beginning to push a little bit to the east. I also mentioned last time how the Russian air campaign has made that a little more complicated, and that's something that we're continuing to deal with. But we are still, as my DoD colleagues can speak to, still flying in that area, still doing strikes almost every single day, and pressuring ISIL in that critical area. Number 2 is the kind of east of the Euphrates, a very different situation, but it's also the core ISIL, core of its phony caliphate, and Raqqa, its self-proclaimed capital. And what we're going to be doing over the coming weeks and months is just squeezing them and constricting them in this area and really isolating the core of Raqqa. Again, it's not only a military effort, though that gets most of the attention, and rightfully so, but it's a dramatic fusion of all the information we bring across the government. So I think my colleague Amos Hochstein was here to brief you a couple weeks ago to talk about a lot of what we're doing here. The number 2 on the map is over at Al-Hal, and that has moved a lot more green since this map was put out, and that's a coalition of Syrian Kurds and Arabs that have made pretty dramatic gains against ISIL in that area, taking about 500 square miles from them. And that was organized simultaneously, and a lot of diplomatic, kind of really shoe leather diplomacy from this building to work with the Iraqi Kurds and the Peshmerga and the Syrian Kurds to get this whole thing synchronized. And that all kicked off late last fall through the winter. Simultaneous operations on the Syrian side of the border at Al-Hal, moving a little bit more south, and then the Peshmerga retaking Shadadi to cut that entire road from Raqqa to Mosul. Similar, before I go to Iraq, operations that happened just over December, cutting off, you can't see it in this map, but if you go, like right here is all green now, taking the primary supply corridor, ISIL, from this area here into Raqqa. This Tishreen Dam is now no longer in their hands, so they have to go all the way around. It's just one effort of how we're going to continue to isolate and constrict in Raqqa. As we do that, as I think I mentioned last time, and our friends in the intelligence community and also in this building, constantly looking to see how they adapt. As they come under pressure, they do stupid things. We're able to see who they are, and then our military colleagues are able to, with quite devastating effect, strike them in their heart in Raqqa. And the high-value targets we continue to strike in Raqqa. Just the day before Christmas, we killed an individual who was directly linked to the Paris attacks. So that's all going to continue, and that's a fused effort across the interagency, from here, DoD, our intelligence community, Treasury, across the board. Before I leave Syria, the last point, in Dar Zor and that Euphrates Valley, that's kind of the heart of their economic infrastructure. And again, I think Amos spoke in some detail with this about you, but we know more about ISIL's economy now than we ever did before, and we're putting all of that information to very good effect. So I think you'll see over the coming weeks and months more news coming out on that area. If I just go into Iraq, very quickly around the Horn, there's Sinjar, which is number 4. Sinjar, of course, is where a lot of this burst onto the public consciousness with Mount Sinjar and the Yazidis. That's the heart of that area. And our Peshmerga friends were able to retake Sinjar last month. So Sinjar is now a real humanitarian kind of coalition effort to try to get the resources in place to restore, reconstruct, and get people back into their homes in Sinjar. That is a huge, huge challenge, because one thing that ISIL does when they take over these areas, they booby-trap houses, they booby-trap public infrastructure, and before they leave, they either make the area almost impossible to re-inhabit, or they blow up buildings as they're leaving. So Sinjar is now an enormous challenge. We'll be meeting as a coalition in early February. I don't think this is, but Secretary Kerry meeting with kind of key coalition members to talk about what we have to do now over the next 3 to 4 months, bringing the coalition together and the resources for the humanitarian and the stabilization challenges. So more to follow on that. Mosul, which is just north of the number 5. Mosul, people ask, when is Mosul going to begin? Mosul's kind of already started, but you got to think of it of a rolling kind of campaign to isolate and squeeze, learn more about the information about what's happening there, but also a very heavy diplomatic political effort to get the Iraqi government in Baghdad working with the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Kurdish regional government to kind of work together to figure out how to do Mosul, because Mosul is a very complicated, there's Shia, Sunni, Arab, Kurd, kind of everybody is there together, and we want to make sure everything is synchronized and working together, and that has now really started. We have a joint operations command center set up in Makhmur, and our diplomats and our ambassador in Baghdad is constantly shuttling between Baghdad and Erbil, and we've had very good cooperation with President Barzani in Erbil and with Prime Minister Badi about planning Mosul. When I was in Iraq last week, one of my critical meetings was with the new governor of Nineveh province. So we have a new governor in Nineveh province who's very actively engaged about planning and coordinating how to constrict and isolate Mosul. So more to follow on that. But it's really focused on isolating, constricting, getting this kind of coherence and cohesiveness together, and I think that you'll see that come together again over the coming months. Going south into Tikrit. Tikrit now is kind of where everything comes together. We've learned an awful lot of lessons about Tikrit. ISIL, when they moved into Tikrit in the summer of 2014, totally depopulated the city. They committed mass atrocities, killing thousands of people, putting it up on YouTube. The retaking of Tikrit was incredibly challenging, just given some of the forces that were involved. And when it was eventually retaken again, it was a situation where the population was almost entirely gone, the city was almost destroyed, and we had to work closely with the Iraqi government and with the United Nations and with the local leaders in Saladin province. And what we did, very active 24/7 effort over a number of months, based out of Baghdad, our embassy, and also folks here at the State Department, to put together the plan about how we can begin to bring the population back to Tikrit. It looked like a very daunting task at the time, the kind of thing that looks impossible to do. But if you look at it now, according to the UN statistics, about 90% of the population has come back to Tikrit. Tikrit University, which was a headquarters of ISIL not too long ago, is reopening, and it's reopening thanks to funds donated by the coalition. About 16,000 students returning to the University of Tikrit, something that would have been unimaginable not too long ago. We've learned a lot of lessons of Tikrit about how to do stabilization, about how to work with the central government in Baghdad and the local authorities to get people back safely, and those are lessons we're now building on. So I'll finish just on Ramadi. Ramadi is significant because it was really the first significant test for the Iraqi security forces that we have helped reorganize and retrain as a coalition. When Ramadi fell in May, it was a real kind of shock to the Iraqis. Ramadi had been under threat when ISIL first moved into Ramadi on January 1st, 2014, 6 months before Mosul. So to kind of put this in perspective, it had been contested, constant fighting, and after a massive car bomb wave when the forces left, it was something that was a real shock. Prime Minister Abadi immediately engaged with us, engaged with the coalition, and said, I want to put together a plan to retake Ramadi as soon as we can. We met at the White House within about 36 hours with President Obama, and we said, we're going to look to see what we do, and we're going to help the Iraqis try to retake Ramadi. Again, at the time, looked like quite a daunting challenge. If you go back to that time and you look at the sequence of decisions that were made, the President made a critical decision on the recommendation of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman to deploy U.S. Special Forces to Taqadum Air Base, not far from Ramadi, and they got out there very, very soon. And this is right between Fallujah and Ramadi, a really heroic mission those guys took on to advise and assist the Iraqi security forces to reorganize, to think about what are they going to need, and then to begin to plan a counterattack on Ramadi. And, I mean, those guys, you just can't speak enough about what they were able to do in terms of the influence they have and the capabilities that they can bring to bear. Every single time now against ISIL that we have advised and assisted an Iraqi operation, or any operation, against ISIL, ISIL has not only been defeated, they've been just totally routed. So we kind of have the combination of what works, and Ramadi was the most difficult test for this. I think Colonel Warren in Baghdad said it's the most difficult thing the Iraqis have done on their own as a military force, really since 2003. That's true. And it was a real, so far, and there's some ways to go, but it's a success, and it's a point that even when the Iraqis are taking casualties, they've taken over 1,000 casualties in this counterattack, they've continued to advance, they've continued to fight, and they've continued to liberate their territory. Commensurate with the counterattack was a very active effort, learning and building on the lessons of Tikrit, to work with the Iraqi government and to work with the local officials in Anbar province, with the tribes, with the governor, to mobilize local forces, to hold areas, and to put together the stabilization plan. So shortly after Ramadi fell, we met in Paris with Secretary Kerry and the main ministers of the coalition with Prime Minister Abadi. And I have to admit, it was a kind of a dark cloud moment because Ramadi had just fallen. And Abadi told the ministers of the coalition, I want your help. I need to retake Ramadi. Here's how we're going to do it. but we need help, we need resources. And the coalition really responded. I put out a letter for New Year's kind of to the coalition, which we put up, just kind of listing about the number of coalition partners that stepped up at that critical moment, not only with military support, but also with stabilization and reconstruction support. And so what Abadi did at that critical time was delegated an awful lot of authority to the local leadership of Anbar Province. We now have authorization for 10,000 tribal fighters in Anbar Province. There's authorization for 24,000 police in Anbar Province. The new Iraqi budget in 2016 has 20,000 new positions for the Iraqi army, which are very important. We think many of those will come from Anbar Province as these areas are liberated. So as the clearing went into Ramadi, we worked at the same time and in parallel with the stabilization and the hold and the resources to bring people back to their homes. Now, because Ramadi was fought over for almost 2 years, you can imagine that most of the city has been quite devastated in the fighting. Booby-trapped houses, I think the number of IEDs, just since, this is just a statistic to give you an indication, since the 28th of December, so about a week ago, 2,316 IEDs were deactivated by a single IED unit that we help advise and assist out of Habaniya Base, which is near Taqadum. So that just gives you a sense of what has to be done here and how difficult this is and the skills and the expertise that it takes to actually clear these areas. But the fact that we have a central government in Baghdad delegating authority to the leaders of Anbar Province, we have a coalition supporting this effort. We've learned a lot of lessons from Tikrit, and so we feel that a lot of the pieces are in place to begin to move to the stabilization phase. However, recognizing just how difficult this is going to be. As ISIL is defeated in areas, we see what they do. They come with waves of car bomb attacks and try to restore kind of some of their luster in the headlines. But unlike the days, and I've been doing this a long time, where they would come with 10 car bombs, and then they would come with an infantry assault to retake territory, hold it. That's not really happening anymore. They're coming with a bunch of car bombs, many of which we're now stopping because of the military capabilities that our partners in DoD have provided to the Iraqis. But they're not then coming with the assault force. It's not the kind of, it's a degraded organization compared to what we've seen before. That said, there's still a ways to go. So I just wanted to give you an update on, because I went last time about this simultaneous pressure campaign and what we're working to do, and I think the results of that, we check it every single day, but I'd like to come check in with you, every couple of months just to talk about different areas and what we're seeing, some things that are going well, and then some things that obviously there will be setbacks along the way. None of this is going to be linear. But overall, that's what we're trying to do. Ramadi was a key test. It'll remain a key test. I think it's still a big place. The entire city is not entirely cleared. The IED statistic I mentioned just gives you some indication of what we still need to do. And after Ramadi, there will be a number of follow-on steps because this thing is far from over. I was in the region last month in UAE and Jordan and Iraq talking about the kind of next steps in the campaign and what we need to do. And I think we have some coherence and some commonality of vision. But, it will remain a very challenging and very difficult fight. So with that, I think I'll turn it over for any questions.
We'll start with you, Matt.
Thanks. I'm just curious if you have seen or are concerned about any complications from the Saudi-Iran flare-up causing sectarian tensions, if you see any complications to the synchronization, as you called it, of the effort in Iraq.
Yeah, Matt, no, thanks. It's a great question, and so far we have not seen any impact on the overall ISIL campaign. As you know, Secretary Kerry here was on the phone almost all day yesterday. We are encouraging de-escalation because anytime you have regional polarization, regional escalation, it obviously can cause difficulties and it opens up seams for extremists on all sides to take advantage of the situation. So, there were reports yesterday of a couple mosques that were targeted. The government of Iraq immediately responded to that. So I would say so far we have not seen that type of impact on the overall campaign. But obviously it's something that we're concerned about, and that's why the Secretary's been spending so much of his time on it.
Rashad?
Are Saudi aircraft taking part in strikes against ISIL targets?
I'd have to refer to DoD. The last time the Saudis took an airstrike against ISIL in Syria, as you know, they've been heavily engaged in Yemen. But some of our other partners, the Jordanians and others, have been continued to strike ISIL targets in Syria.
Are you aware of one recently?
A Saudi strike against ISIL in Syria? As I said, I think the Saudi, they have their capabilities. Their bandwidth is pretty stretched with Yemen. So I can't say when the last time they took a strike in Syria. But of all our partners, you have to look at how they're contributing in different ways. And the Jordanians, for example, I just took a number of airstrikes just last week.
Jim?
Sorry, the who?
Jordanians.
Jordanians.
Jim?
Thanks very much. Looking at that map, when you look particularly at the Syria border, looks like you've cut off to really a small choke point, the controlled area, just as you were saying. I wonder, has that translated into effectively stopping the flow of fighters across that border? And are you seeing cooperation from the Turks, which I know has been ambivalent, as it's been described to me at times? Is that in much better shape as it looks on the map? Because, physically it looks like you made that progress. I'm just curious if it translates to stopping that. And then I just have a quick follow, if you don't mind.
So, Jim, I think as I mentioned in my opening, definitely seeing progress along that border on the Turkish side. And definitely seeing a willingness and readiness for the Turks to engage with us in terms of advice and what needs to be done. They have moved resources there. And I think this has been covered in the press, but they've moved resources there. It's much harder to get from the Turkish side of the border into Syria from that strip, all of which is very positive. So now this month we're following up with them on a number of things, not only what's happening on their side of the border, but also what we want to do together on the Syrian side of the border. And that's why the chairman is there this week. That's why the vice president will be in town. And that's why we have a number of the vice president going to Turkey and a number of our kind of border security experts at the working level going to Turkey. So I would just say, yes, the cooperation's been good. Our information, it's much harder to get for an ISIL fighter to get from Turkey into Syria now than it was some months ago. When you look at the data on this, those who kind of count this, there's often a lag in terms of when they can take a number and what's happening today. All I can say is our sense and our indication is that the network overall is substantially degraded. We know that ISIL in its public statements has called on foreign fighters, maybe, hey, don't go into Syria, maybe go to Libya, which is another indication that Syria is now not as hospitable an environment as it might have been in the past. So I think the trend line overall is moving in the right direction, but it's something we got to stay at every single day because, as I've said before to you, this is a challenge like we've never seen before. The world has never seen something like this. Upwards of 35,000 now foreign fighters from 100 countries all around the world, supercharged by social media, Twitter and everything. It's something we've never seen before. So as we try to, when we think of the core, we want to make sure that a foreign fighter gets into Syria or Iraq, they can't get out, and we try to make sure that they can't get in. At the same time, we're working globally with all of these partners, which is why we have a 65-member coalition on the criminal justice side, on the intelligence sharing side, just to try to make it harder for these guys to move around. But again, as we saw in Paris and elsewhere, that we have work to do. And our partners have work to do.
A brief follow on the 10,000 tribal fighters you mentioned in Anbar. Is Prime Minister Abadi playing nice with them, so to speak, or is he, the concerns expressed about his deference to Iran and therefore reluctance to play nicely with the Sunnis? Are you seeing that abating?
He's fully supported the tribal mobilization in Anbar province. When Secretary Carter was there a couple weeks ago, this was one of their key conversations. In fact, he upped the cap from 8,000 to 10,000. And that just comes into the kind of, it's about 10,000 tribal fighters, 24,000 local police from Anbar, so you're talking an awful lot of people. So if a young Anbari wants to get in the fight, there are plenty of avenues to do that. And our two platforms, one at Taqadum Air Base and one at Al-Assad, where we have been since this campaign really started, out in the western Euphrates Valley. We've been working closely with 3 tribes there in Haditha and these areas in which if you looked at this map over time, you'd have a little bit of green in Haditha, and that has expanded. And had we not gone to Al-Assad Air Base when this campaign kicked off, in September of 2014. Had we not engaged with those tribes at the time that we did, I think that entire area would have been gone. But by engaging with them, by giving them capabilities, and they have gotten the full support of the Iraqi government, we're able to not only hold off these number of ISIL advances back in those days, but they're now not only holding the line, but beginning to conduct their own operations. So the tide out there, and it's like the Wild West out there, I've been out there a few times, has shifted. But answer your question, in terms of Prime Minister Abadi, he's given full support to this program we have in Anbar.
We're just going to take two more. Justin?
Thanks. So if the negotiating parties are demonstrating that they can't work together to find a political solution in Syria, as we're seeing with Iran and Saudi Arabia, does that require you, or are you working on a strategy that doesn't include a political solution in Syria? Is there a way to defeat ISIS without that?
I think our special envoy in Syria is in Saudi Arabia now, working with a lot of the opposition groups to to set the stage for these negotiations that have to take place, we hope, later on this month. But I think even the Saudis recognize you have to have some sort of a political process to de-escalate the overall conflict. So I let the Saudis speak for themselves, but what I've heard is they've said that nothing here should really stop the process that was launched in Vienna, and that's something that's a real consensus of the international community now, enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution. No question this is extremely difficult. That's something that we've said from day one. But you have to bring all the external actors to a table and then the internal actors to a table. So we've gotten all the external actors together really for the first time since the Civil War started, and now we're working to bring the internal actors together to a table later this month. So a lot of folks here in this building are working on that every day, and that remains the plan as enshrined in the Security Council resolution.
Saeed, I'm going to give you the last one today.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. I'm a bit confused on the figure that you gave, the numbers, the vacancies in the Iraqi army, 26,000 or something like this that it's getting absorbed. Will these be special units like the Awakening Council, or will they be part of the Iraqi army, and will they coordinate with militias like Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi and so on?
So the 20,000 numbers in the new Iraqi budget, they opened up space for 20,000 new positions. And that's important because we want to bring more folks into the Army. So again, if you're from a town in the Euphrates Valley in Anbar province and you're 20 years old and you want to join to protect your community, we want to make sure that some of the deficiencies of the prior model, or is a little bit more ad hoc, such as in the Awakening, that it's embedded and enshrined in the state structures. So if you want to risk your life to defend your community from Daesh and others, you'll be taken care of by the state. So there are 3 vehicles now to do that. There's the Tribal Mobilization Program, and that is all enshrined in the Iraqi legal structure and the budget to make sure that people get paid, something you work on every single day. There's the police, and there's a cap for 24,000 police in Anbar province, which is what it was before the crisis. And then there's now 20,000 new positions for the Army in this new budget. We have the training facilities. We're training. It's going up we're at about 18,000 now that we've trained. But it's a whole host. It's the Army, it's the CTS in terms of our training. But just to be very clear on the numbers I'm talking about, focus on Anbar, 10,000 tribal fighters in Anbar, 24,000 police. And then there are the new number of recruits in the Iraqi Army of 20,000. Now, the Iraqis have asked us to help them with this in terms of, where the folks go, what units and things, and that's something that we're working with them all the time in terms of how to structure their overall security architecture. But that'll take some time. But in terms of defeating ISIL, you need the force to go in and do the clearing, and I think we have had some success with that now. You need the force to do the holding, and that's the police and these tribal forces. And then you need the long-term sustainable architecture, because we're learning a lot of the lessons from the past year. And the long-term sustainable architecture is to make sure you have a more federal-based structure, which is interwoven in the Iraqi constitution, in which the central government is delegating authority to the provinces, to the local leaders, so that people who are risking their lives to protect their community are taken care of by the state. And that's the bargain that this new Iraqi government has offered. And so far, if you look at Tikrit, if you look at what we're starting to see in Anbar, you can see how that can come together.
How concerned are you, though, that these sectarian tensions in the region, not just between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but now all the Sunnis are going to bleed over into Iraq, and the Shia and the Sunnis are not going to be able to work together, and Abadi will maybe, hesitate to reach out to the Sunnis in deference to Iran?
So let me answer it two ways. On the one hand, as someone who works this every day, very concerned whenever you see this kind of potential for real polarization, because it enables extremists on both sides to take advantage of the situation, which is extremely dangerous and plays into the hands of groups like ISIL. So that's something, of course, that we're concerned about, because our objective here is to support moderates on both sides of this kind of sectarian divide. So that's one, and that's why we're working very hard to try to de-escalate things. On the other hand, try not to get into a too simplistic box of Sunni and Shia, because there's so many divisions within the two communities. I'm talking a lot here about Anbar province. It's about 100% Sunni, but there's Salafi, there's secularists, there's Baathists, there's tribal divisions, there's like everything. There's a whole array of different viewpoints. Among the Shia, you have in Iraq a great deal, majority of the Shia see their Marja as Grand Ayatollah Sistani, who has a totally different vision than the supreme leader in Tehran. Sistani believes in the separation of the state and the community in a more quietist tradition than Khamenei, and it's a totally different viewpoint. So trying to kind of not get into the box of all the Sunni and all the Shia, because it's just not really accurate and not how this thing goes. What we worry about when things get too polarized is that extremists on both sides try to take advantage of the situation. So no doubt in the immediate wake of something like this, I think you'll see more provocations from some of the extremists on both sides, and that's something that we try to tamp down. And a good example was when there were reports yesterday that some mosques were attacked in Hilla, some Sunni mosques were attacked in Hilla. The Iraqi government responded immediately. So I would just say, concerning, yes, there's all sorts of things that concern us every single day. Whenever you see something like this for potential polarization, it's concerning. At the same time, we try to not put things into too simplistic a black and white box, because that's not the reality. It's just so many divisions within each community, and trying to strengthen the cohesiveness of the moderates on both sides is something that we try to do every day. But I will not underestimate just how difficult it is, as you know, Elise.
Thanks, everybody.
Updated version of that map. And if you do, can we get a copy? And if you don't, can we get a copy of this one?
Yeah, we'll,
For these
we'll
guys.
get you a copy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, I do not have an opening statement, so we can get right after. What's
Right.
on your mind?
So, as we just heard from Special Envoy McGurk, the Secretary apparently spent the entire day on the phone yesterday, which we didn't really know about. We knew about one phone call that he made on Sunday. And so who else did he call? Other than the Iranian foreign minister.
I can assure you there was no conspiracy to
I'm not suggesting that it's a conspiracy. I just
to obscure his
Can you bring
phone
us up to date?
conversations.
Let
The
me
secretary
rephrase the question. Can you bring us up to date on the Secretary's phone calls?
Secretary has made several phone calls in the last 24 hours or so. He has talked on numerous occasions to leaders in both Saudi Arabia and Iran. So I think he's talked to the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia a couple of times. He's talked to Foreign Minister Al-Jaber. He's talked to Foreign Minister Zarif a couple of times as well. While I don't have additional calls today to read out, I can assure you that he will continue to stay in close communication today on this issue. And what he's going to be doing is talking to other leaders in the region as well. So I don't have any new calls to read out, but I can assure you that he is going to stay at it, and he's going to broaden the list of people that he's going to speak to include other regional leaders.
Do you know, in the course of those calls, has he made it a specific point, apart from the obvious immediate tension between Riyadh and Tehran, but about the peace talks that are supposed to be coming up and the importance? Has he stressed it it as a primary point beyond the immediate tensions that those that are set to happen on the 25th in Geneva go ahead as planned.
Yeah, without getting into specific details of each call, which I can understand we're not interested in doing, I can tell you that certainly one of the key things on his mind, as we talked about yesterday, is to de-escalate the tensions, restore some sense of calm, encourage dialogue and engagement between these countries bilaterally, but also to make the point that there are other pressing issues in the region too. We understand this is a source of tension. Nobody's trying to understate that, but that there are other pressing issues that constantly need attention and local leadership. And moving the political process forward in Syria is one of those issues. So again, I don't want to detail every line that he's uttering here, but I can assure you that not letting the Vienna process stall or fall backward is clearly top on his list.
Let me just say, hold on, let me just finish. This is very short. Yesterday, you may have noticed that the Iranians sent a letter to the Security Council expressing regret about the embassy, what happened to the Saudi embassy. Does the U.S. administration, which condemned the storming of the embassy, do you consider that case closed, or do you think that more needs to be done from the Iranian side?
Well, we're aware of the letter and certainly aware of the comments expressed in that. I think it's an encouraging sign. But in terms of closing the book, this is not something that we're investigating, Matt. It's really a matter between Saudi Arabia and Iran to continue to discuss. It's not our place to close a book. As I said, we're not independently reviewing that attack or this violence. Obviously, we want to see further dialogue between the two, and we want to see some sense of engagement to try to resolve the tensions that resulted in the wake of these executions.
Kevin, can I just follow up on the question before that? I mean, he's making the point that there are other pressing issues in terms of dealing with Syria and the like. Is there a concern that, the behavior of the country is going forward, the cutting of ties with Iran, and, today Iran unveiled this new ballistic missile, which we can get into a bit, that they're using this for, political one-upmanship to affect some of these other issues going on?
I don't think we're trying to make a judgment here about what political motivations may be at work. As I said yesterday, diplomatic relations, those are sovereign decisions that countries make. What we've said, and we'll continue to make the case, and the Secretary continues to make this case, and will as he continues to have these conversations, that we believe engagement and dialogue and diplomatic relations are important. We believe that these tensions, and specifically related to the executions over the weekend, are things that these countries need to work out bilaterally. I won't speak to their political motivations one way or the other. Obviously, if that is an undercurrent, and I'm not saying it is, but if it were, that would be troubling, and certainly would be unhelpful and not productive to getting us to a point where we can deal with real key pressing issues in the region.
Well, in his conversations, without saying that, espousing any type of political motivations, is he making clear to leaders in the country, don't let these issues be affected by your tensions right now?
I don't think he's lecturing, and I don't think that's all our intent here. But he is urging calm. He is stressing the need for dialogue and engagement. And thirdly, reminding that, again, there's lots of work to be done in the region. It doesn't mean that we don't understand the tension caused here by the executions and the events afterward. We do understand that. But we believe that it's important to work through that tension, work through those disagreements, so that we can all work harder together on other issues which are affecting the Middle East writ large. The fight against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, which Brett just briefed you on, the continuing strife in Yemen, and of course the need to really keep moving the political process in Syria forward. There's a lot on the agenda in the Middle East, and the Secretary wants to make sure that we're all of us are still pulling on the oars to get at those objectives.
Given the Secretary's belief in the utility of engagement and diplomatic relations. Is he encouraging the Saudis to take the sovereign decision to restore diplomatic relations?
Again, we're not lecturing. We're not.
I didn't ask you for
No,
lecturing.
I
I
know
asked
that,
if he's
Arshad.
encouraging
I
them.
got it. I'm not going to get into every issue. I'm not going to get into every line he's uttering on these calls. But as I said to Matt, I think it's safe to say that his message overall is one to encourage calm, to encourage all parties to look for ways to de-escalate the tensions, to take it down a notch, and to engage. We're strong believers in diplomatic engagement and dialogue, and we believe we'd like to see leaders in the region espouse the same sort of approach to these problems. Ultimately, these are decisions they have to make. We understand that too. These are sovereign decisions. Countries get to decide for themselves who they're going to talk to and who they're not going to talk to. We just think that at this particular time, with all the other issues going on, and the progress that we have made, not just against ISIL, but towards a political process in Syria, that it would be detrimental to regional stability if the decisions that they make are to disengage and to shut down avenues for conversation and dialogue.
The U.S. government, its current belief in diplomatic engagement and maintaining diplomatic ties has a long history of cutting diplomatic ties, not least with Iran and Cuba. At Libya, you didn't have diplomatic representation for decades, but they were never formally cut. And it has taken you decades, truly, half a century to get back to diplomatic relations with Cuba. So I find it perplexing that you wouldn't perhaps, given how strongly you say you believe in this, your own history notwithstanding, that you wouldn't encourage them to rethink that particular decision.
I didn't say that we didn't encourage them to rethink it. I'm not going to get into the specifics of diplomatic discussions. It's just not a good policy for us to do from the podium. But I think it's safe to say that one of the messages that the Secretary has been transmitting and will continue to do so is that the importance of engagement and dialogue and conversation to work through this.
So did you encourage them to rethink it?
Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of diplomatic discussions.
Well, and then one other one, if I may say, is it plausible to you that, and I know that the investigation, to the extent that there is one, is surely not complete, but is it plausible to you that the Saudi embassy in Tehran could have a place where you guys have experience in having embassies attacked, could have been attacked, burned, besieged over a significant period of time without some measure of Iranian government acquiescence?
I don't know the answer to that question. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Iran has expressed regret. They've done that in a letter to the UN. I think that's an encouraging sign. The tick-tock of what happened, who did what, when, who didn't do things they were supposed to do, I think that's for the Iranian government to speak to and to look at themselves and to review. Not for us. We're not doing an independent investigation here on what happened. It was obviously an act of violence or multiple acts of violence, depending on how you look at it, that we condemned very publicly. We take very seriously the safety and security of diplomatic property, as you might expect we would, and we respect that property of other nations here in the United States. So obviously it was very troubling and disconcerting, and we don't ever want to see that. But it's just happened. I think it's too soon for anybody to know exactly how it transpired or whether there was any lack of effort or alacrity in trying to stop it or stem it once it started. But that's for Iranian authorities to speak to.
Wait a second. Did you not get the timeline that we talked about yesterday? I think you did. Do you somehow doubt the Saudi explanation or the Saudi timeline of what happened, which was that they requested protection and help from the Iranian authorities numerous times and never got an answer? Are you doubting that account?
I have seen the timeline, and I'm grateful to have been able to see it, but I'm going to let Saudi authorities speak to
Well,
the
do you
veracity of that timeline, and I'll let the Iranians speak as well.
Okay, but do you have any
for
reason
their
to doubt
for their
it?
react to it.
Do
We're
you have
not.
any reason to doubt that the Saudis asked for help and
We
then didn't get it?
We can't confirm or deny those reports that were related
All right,
that were in
and
that
then
timeline.
I just wanted to,
Plausibility.
Sorry?
Plausibility was my question. My question isn't about the exact
I
timelines.
I don't know how to
understand.
answer that question.
Well, is it plausible? I mean, if an embassy in Washington D.C., many of which have, for which you, the United States government, is responsible for providing protection, were attacked, and they sought help and they didn't get an answer, it seems to me that it would be hard to view that as somehow implausible that the U.S. government didn't choose to do something here. And I find it hard to believe that you find it plausible that the Iranian government didn't acquiesce in this attack.
I didn't say that it was plausible that they did or they didn't. I'm saying it's just happened. Too soon for anybody to know, at least for us to know. We're not conducting an investigation of this attack. This is for Iranian authorities to speak to. They've already expressed regret, as I said, or as they said, and I don't think it's beneficial for me at this podium to engage in hypotheticals about what might or might not have happened. I think what we want to focus on, what the Secretary is very focused on, is trying to move past this tension right now and get everybody to engage in some form of dialogue and engagement that can help resolve this, but also to get focused on the other issues in the region that we really believe need some attention.
Do you believe
So-
that the Saudis overreacted? Do you believe that they have overreacted?
Overreacted.
Yes, they
what-
overreacted by cutting off relations with Iran. So
As I
quickly
said,
and
as
so
I
on.
said yesterday, Saeed, these are sovereign decisions, and the governments that make these decisions, they need to speak for that in terms of the motivation, why they did it, and what's behind it, and how long they're going to abide by those decisions. We've made it clear. We continue to make it clear that we believe that diplomatic engagement, particularly in this region, particularly over this issue, is important, and we'd like to see that continue. So our view is engagement, conversation, dialogue can help, and cutting those avenues and pathways off. Obviously, it's hard to see how that's going to be helpful to some sort of diplomatic, peaceful resolution to this tension.
But is it a concern?
Well, based on the Secretary's conversations with the Deputy Crown Prince, has he been left with the impression that perhaps the Saudis overreacted?
I won't speak to the specifics of the conversation, Roz. You know I won't do that, and I certainly won't speak to what decisions going forward that the Saudis might or might not take.
But
They
I'm
should
asking
speak
about
to
the
that.
Secretary's assessment.
I'm not going to get into the details of these discussions. As I said, he has been having several, and I think you can expect that he'll continue to reach out to counterparts in the region, and his message will be the same for all of them, which is what we've been talking about in terms of restoring calm.
Has the United States given any thought to restoring its own diplomatic ties with Iran?
There's been no decisions in that
But
regard.
you're very keen on diplomacy and outreach for others.
Yes, but as I said, sovereign decisions, right? And the United States has made its own sovereign decisions with respect to some certain countries. I know of no plans to restore diplomatic ties with Iran at this
How
time.
about this? Do you find it unusual at all that now that you and the Saudis at least share one thing in common, neither of you have diplomatic relations with Iran, that the Secretary is on the phone with the Iranian foreign minister talking about something that has nothing to do with a nuclear deal?
Every
That's-
opportunity that he has to speak with the foreign minister Zarif, they talk about the JCPOA and the nuclear deal, as well as the cases of missing Americans in Iran. So look, these are
Do you not find it
this is an
unusual that
exceptional.
the foreign minister of the United States of America, which has not had diplomatic relations with Iran since 1980, is on the phone to this guy constantly?
Oh, look,
Perhaps even as much
even
as
before-
he is on the phone to the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, which has been a U.S. partner for
I think given
half a
I
century.
think given the tensions over the weekend, the conversations he's having are wholly appropriate.
I'm not asking if you think they're appropriate. Do you find it unusual that here you are, a country that does not have and has not had diplomatic relations with Iran since 1979 or 1980, being in some ways, I know you don't want to call yourself a mediator or a broker or whatever, but encouraging discussion with a long-time Iranian discussion with a long-time partner of yours, the
No,
Saudis.
I don't,
No?
no, we
It
don't.
does speak to the evolution of the relationship between the U.S. and Iran, and particularly between Foreign Minister Zarif and Secretary Kerry. As Matt said, that he's able to talk to him not just about the nuclear issue, but about other, issues of regional concern. I mean, it does speak to growing, if not warming, ties.
I don't know that I'd characterize it that way, Elise. Obviously,
How would you
until this
describe it?
weekend, the discussions with Iran have obviously centered on the nuclear deal and on the case of the
Centered, but
missing
not been
Americans.
exclusive.
No, been exclusive to that.
No, they
but,
have not.
But we
They've
have,
talked about.
You don't talk to them
but
about
we-
your
You ta-
Americans.
obviously,
And you also
there's
talked to
been
them about
the
the
Syria
about
political
Iraq.
process. Hang
You're
on a
talking about
second.
lots of things.
Hang on a second.
Well, don't
Just-
misspeak.
I'm not misspeaking.
You said they were
Arshad.
exclusive to the nuclear deal. They
Up until
weren't.
recently, yes, the discussions were on the nuclear deal and on the case of the missing Americans. Obviously, we have opened up an engagement with Iran on the Syria political process, and they have been, and we want them to continue to be a constructive player in that process, clearly. But we don't have, obviously, normal diplomatic relations with Iran where we talk about a full spate of issues that we would with a country that we do have diplomatic relations, whether it's economics, trade, people-to-people exchanges, all that kind of thing. We don't talk about that with Iran. But there are some specific issues where we have and will continue to have a dialogue with them. In light of what we have done with Iran since the deal and moving forward in the political process in Syria, the Secretary believed that in the wake of the issues over the weekend regarding the executions and the activities that followed them, he felt it was prudent to have a discussion with Foreign Minister Zarif about that, as he did with Foreign Minister Al-Jubeir and the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I mean, he feels that's wholly appropriate given the spate of other issues that we're dealing with in the region.
But I do think does seem as if his growing discussions with the Iranian foreign minister, whether it's on Syria, whether it's on Yemen, whether it's on other issues, that it's an effort to bring Iran into the regional discussion as a productive member in the region. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
These discussions are really, again, point-specific and not part of a larger effort by the United States to, quote-unquote, bring Iran into the international community. The degree to which Iran is or isn't a part of the international community falls to them. It falls to them to make those decisions. And in many ways, they have not yet made that kind of decision because they still are a state sponsor of terrorists. And they still have a ballistic missile program. And we still have concerns about destabilizing activities that they continue to propagate in the region. So there's no effort here as a result of these incidents to sort of open up or warm ties with Iran. As we have said, our discussions with Iran have been very specific to very specific issues, and I don't see that changing in the near future.
Yes, Iran continues to do all those destabilizing things, still a state sponsor of terror, still has ballistic missile programs, still does inordinate, still holds Americans in prison that you want released, and yet the Secretary is on the phone with him, the foreign minister, quite a bit. At least as many. You said a couple times with him and a couple times with.
Right, well, go back to what I said
Deputy
before.
Crown Prince
Go
of
back to
Saudi
what I
Arabia.
said before, though. There are other issues in the region. Issues such as the implementation of the nuclear deal, which has regional implications. Issues such as the political process in Syria that they have been a part of and we want them to continue to be a part of. And, of course, issues of our American citizens there. I mean, that warrant discussions of their own right, and certainly in the wake of the tensions, are all that more important. As I said, one of the messages the Secretary continues to deliver in these conversations is there are other issues in the region that we don't want to see derailed by this tension. Obviously, Iran is at the center, as is Saudi Arabia, of this recent tension. It just follows that he would have a discussion about that to make sure that the other pressing issues, which we are continuing to work with Iran on, continue.
Are there other state sponsors of terrorism that you can consider, like the Sudanese or the Syrians, for example, that you would consider opening up
There are no
connection, a dialogue with?
I know of no such plans, Matt. Yeah, Jim.
You're aware of the Saudi view that they're standing up to Iran because the U.S. isn't anymore. And when you look at a series of events in the last few weeks, you got a ballistic missile test, no sanctions to follow. You have Jason resign continued detention along with the other Americans there. You get rockets fired by a U.S. carrier, which didn't seem to be an accidental message at the time, and you get a burning embassy, Saudi embassy in Tehran. And I just wonder, how do you fight that perception that, to protect the Iranian nuclear deal, that the U.S. is soft pedaling these other issues that in the past they would have taken them to task for?
There's absolutely no soft pedaling with respect to Iran and their destabilizing activities. What we said on the ballistic missile program, there have been sanctions put in place as a result of that program, and as I said yesterday, we're still working through potential sanctions on more recent ballistic missile
Delayed,
tests.
though. Right?
We've got some technical issues we're working out, but we're still working our way through that. There's no queasiness here in the United States about holding Iran accountable for their destabilizing activities in the region, which continue. And what we said all along on the Iran deal is that an Iran without nuclear weapons is arguably safer for the region, everybody in the region, than an Iran with nuclear weapons. So do we want to see the Iran deal implemented? You bet we do. And are we going to do everything we can to meet our commitments inside the JCPOA? You bet we will. And our expectation is that Iran will do the same. And they are working towards implementation of that deal, which ultimately does help decrease Iran's ability to destabilize the region. Does it take it away altogether? Absolutely not, Jim. We know, again, they support terrorist networks throughout the region. They are still working a ballistic missile program that gives everyone pause. But there are levers at our disposal and tools at our disposal which we have used and we will continue to use. And the message to anyone thinking that the United States is somehow becoming weak on Iran or soft-kneed, our message would be that is absolutely false and not true. We still have a very strong, very robust military presence in the region under Central Command. That will continue. We have been sailing U.S. Navy ships in and out of the Arabian Gulf now, since the end of World War II. That will continue. And I don't think anybody can if you just take a look at not only our presence, but our activities, our leadership of the coalition against ISIL, nobody can look at that menu and say that the United States is somehow turning a blind eye or weak-kneed towards Iran. It's just not true. It's not borne out by the facts.
Excuse me, Saeed. Can I just ask you to address the last week, in the week between Christmas and New Year's, we talked about this a little bit the other day, the sanctions, some people had said that they expected sanctions, new ballistic missile sanctions to be announced sometime during that week, and they weren't. At the same time as they were saying that, there were also people on the Hill and elsewhere putting out the idea that the State Department had stopped Treasury from putting those in place as when they had expected because of Iranian objections. Are you aware of that at all?
I've seen reports on that. What I can just
forget
say
about the reports on it. Can you address the allegations that are being made by?
I was getting there. I was getting there. I just trying to work my way into my answer here. Look, I've seen the reports, Matt. What I can tell you is that we take very seriously the ballistic missile program that Iran continues to pursue. We have tools at our disposal in the terms, particularly in terms of sanctions that we have used in the past. We are still open to using that in the future. As I said yesterday, we are fully prepared to continue to use sanctions. With respect to this most recent ballistic missile test, we are still working through some technical issues there, and I just don't have any sanctions to announce today.
Well, I understand that, but can you
This
at least
idea that
address what the technical issues are, or address the
I
claim
cannot.
that's being made by some that the State Department stopped these sanctions from being imposed because the Iranians objected to them?
What I will tell you is there continues to be a robust interagency discussion about moving forward on sanctions for this particular program, and that's about as far as I'm going to go.
That's not much of a denial. So if it's, because I would think that if it was not true that the Iranians said, hey, wait a second, you can't put these sanctions in place, or we'll walk from the nuclear deal, that you would want to, I would think that you would want to deny that.
Those claims are fairly simplistic. That somebody just raises a hand.
That they're not true.
That somebody just raises a hand and says, nope, stop the bus. That's not the way it works. And there's a lengthy and involved, and appropriately so, interagency discussion about the use of sanctions for Iran or for any other country that we impose sanctions on. And that discussion is ongoing right now.
I know, but are these claims simply made up out of whole cloth?
Well, I don't know.
or
You'd
is
have
it-
to talk to the sources that offered these claims. But
They're saying that the State Department intervened and stopped these sanctions from being imposed last week, and I'm just at the behest of the Iranians. I just want to know whether that's true or not. And it would seem to me that if it's not true, you would want to come out and say, no, it's not true.
we don't take sanctions advice or guidance from Iran or any other country. Okay, but we do make the decisions on an interagency basis between all the appropriate agencies. It's not about one agency or another stopping a train. It's a constant process of interagency dialogue and discussion. But we don't take foreign policy advice and guidance from Iran or from any other country. Yeah.
John, a quick follow-up on the point of the Iran deal. Could this crisis potentially unravel the Iran deal in your view?
Could the current tensions?
Could it basically
Look, everything.
scuttle the deal that has already been signed? And
I'm really
maybe
not-
that's Saudi Arabia's intention?
I'm
perhaps?
terrible at hypotheticals, Saeed, so I don't know how to answer that other than to say that we continue to march towards implementation and meet our commitments. The Iranians, from everything we've seen, continue to march toward implementation and meet their commitments. That's our expectation. Yeah, Michelle?
On the execution of Mr. An-Nimr, do you view that Iran is intervening in the Saudi internal affairs when they condemn the execution of Mr. An-Nimr, especially that he is or he was a Saudi citizen, not an Iranian citizen?
I'm not in a position to answer that, other than to say, the Iranians should speak to their public pronouncements about what they choose to condemn or not condemn. We made it clear here from this podium what our view was about, and continue to make our view known about our concerns about the legal process in Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, I can't speak for another nation, what they decide to say and why they decide to say it. I can only tell you what our view is, and our view is that the current tensions are not helpful to moving forward on some very key issues in the Middle East that need constant attention, and that's why the Secretary is going to stay laser focused on this.
But they didn't say only. They put the Saudi diplomatic facilities on fire in Iran.
Look, we've been through the issue of the attack on the diplomatic facility. We condemn that. We're not bashful about doing that, and we'll let Iranian authorities speak to what happened and how it happened, Michelle. What we want to see, and I think this is really important. There's a lot of finger pointing going on, and I get that. But what we want to see here is moving forward and moving past this. That's what's really important here. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean we dismiss the concerns. We understand the concerns, but we also continue to make the case that focusing on that, affixing blame, and a refusal to engage and to have a dialogue to work through the problems, none of that contributes to getting at some very real, significant security challenges in the Middle East, and commitments, oh, by the way, by many nations in the region, security commitments to solving some of these great problems. So what we want to see is we understand the concern, but we want to see people trying to work through those and then move forward. There's just too much going on right now. There's too many big, important issues in the Middle East that need to be solved. Samir?
By saying that you are concerned about the legal process in Saudi Arabia, do you mean that you do not accept the accusations by the Saudis to Nimr?
No, we have been very careful not to get into the specifics of each individual case.
Because they accuse them of arming people and creating cells.
I know that. We have abstained and will continue to abstain from speaking to each individual case. We have concerns.
But the perception here is that he is an innocent. Like by not saying anything, you are giving a perception that you consider him innocent.
We're not going to make a judgment on each of these cases. We've expressed our concerns about the executions to the Saudis. We expressed concerns about the legal process in general before that. We'll continue to do so, but we're not going to get into, legislating each and every case here from the podium.
Why not? I mean, you do that with all sorts of other countries, including Iran, when they've executed individuals before, or when they've tried individuals before, not just Americans. You condemned it. You do it with the Chinese all the time. Every time they round up a poet or a dissident or whatever, you cite their individual cases and you say that you think that their treatment has been wrong.
Well, this was a pretty big group,
yeah,
47,
but it's because of one person that all this stuff happened.
And as I said yesterday, Matt, we specifically.
Well, then you do talk to individuals.
Well, I said we certainly made our concerns known about the Al-Nimr cases to the Saudis beforehand, and I spoke to it yesterday about our concerns that in that particular execution there was concern by the United States about it exacerbating tensions. But we're not going to get into making an individual judgment on each of the 47 cases. I've only got time for one more. Yeah.
Change subject. About Poland. Recently there were some critical voices here in U.S. media about new Polish government, and among others, Washington Post editorial board claimed that Poland's new right-wing leaders have crossed the line. And last week your colleague Mark Toner was asked about it, and he said, I quote, we raised question with the Polish government about actions with regard to constitutional tribunal. So my question is, on which level did you raise those questions, and what was the response?
I think you won't like my answer, but the answer is, as a standard rule, we don't talk about the details of our diplomatic discussions. But Mark was right. We did raise our concerns and questions with the Polish authorities. We do that at multiple levels here at the State Department. And we don't typically get into the details of how that's done or with whom. Last one.
Sorry, on the Gitmo detainees story, are you...
Which one? Which story?
Excuse me, it's been reported that there will be some that are transferred soon, as early as this week.
I don't have any pending transfers to speak to. I just don't. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.